My name's Peter. We're recording. Just in time. I'm Peter Moran. I'm a curriculum specialist on this project. Worked alongside Corrine and some other awesome staff members at the Connecticut Museum of Culture and History.
Awesome. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen and tell you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. So kind of the plan for today is we're going to start with just some close looking at an object from our collection to kind of get everybody thinking about the themes that we're going to be diving into today. And then I'm going to do a little bit of background about this project that we've been working on that has led to this research and this content that we're going to be talking about today. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what it was like to research this history in our collection and what sources we were able to find. And then we're going to do kind of a close look. We're going to do a close look at two individuals from Hartford in 1860, Miranda Robinson and James Williams, to kind of view the Black community in Hartford during that time through their eyes and perspectives. And then we're going to kind of widen our glance and look at different Black communities across Connecticut. And we will have time at the end for questions and answers. So if you have anything, we just encourage you to drop it in the chat, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. So to get started, I just like everybody to take a second and just look at the image I have on the screen. And I would encourage you all to just drop, what do you notice? What's going on here in the chat? Somebody's saying it looks like it's embroidery. In a second, I am going to pull up another slide that's going to have a kind of a closer view of some of the text. Somebody noticed that, okay, so somebody thinking that this is a needlework made by a young woman, maybe made by Miranda Robinson, maybe a teaching tool, right? Maybe this is a way for her to learn embroidery. It says that she's 8, the path of duties, the path of safety. That phrase is calling out to a lot of people, which is great. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. Yeah, right. So we know that there's some religious element to this, right? There's a reference to Jesus. Absolutely. And then, yeah, I'm just going to pull up a kind of closer look at some of that text in case you wanted to take a closer look. Who do we think this young woman is who made this? What do we think we can learn about her based on this piece? She's from Saybrook, right? Okay, very good. And I think somebody already pointed out that we think that she's a young girl, right? She's 8 years old, right? So she has, religion, Christianity is important to her, right? To include those details in here. All right. Awesome. So hold your thoughts and your impressions of this piece, everyone. We're going to circle back to this in just a few minutes. But yeah, talking a little bit about this project. So a little bit of context to kind of catch everybody up to speed. So you may have heard about a course and a piece of legislation about Black and Latino studies in Connecticut. So this legislation was actually passed in 2019 that basically said that the state was going to create a high school level course specifically about Black and Latino studies, and that this course would be offered in every Connecticut high school. And so this was a really kind of groundbreaking piece of legislation. We were one of the first states to pass something like this and create something like this. And I also dropped the link in the bottom that has the curriculum if you wanted to read it. It also has a documentary about the kind of creating of this curriculum, which includes student testimonies from a lot of the students who advocated for this course, and a lot of really passionate, explaining that they wanted to learn this history, that they sat through US history courses never hearing about Black Americans and Latino Americans. So if you want to go in a deeper dive, I encourage you all to click on that link and watch their testimonials. So basically how this kind of happened was that the curriculum was developed by the State Education Resource Center. They had a lot of consultants and advisors working on developing this course. Starting in 22-23, so last school year, it was offered in every Connecticut school district, as it is again this school year. And after being piloted before that. And so we, being aware as the Connecticut Museum, being aware of all of this, wanted to support these teachers teaching this course, wanted to support these efforts. And so we applied for a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services to kind of use our collection to develop resources that would support teachers and support this curriculum. So we received that grant. So the previous school year was kind of our development phase where we worked on researching our collection and developing these materials. And so this year, these materials are currently being piloted by teachers all across the state of Connecticut who are teaching this high school course. And so what did we want to do with this project? So like I said, we wanted to develop not programs, but kind of self-sufficient like lesson plans, everything a teacher would need to teach a lesson in their class. Really, we wanted to bring in local and Black and Latino history, right? So the curriculum does a really great job of spanning, American history and outside of American history as well. But we know the significance of local stories, the importance of students knowing the histories of their towns and their communities. And so as the Connecticut Museum, we wanted to use our collection to kind of bring in these local stories of Black and Latino Connecticutans. And a big part of this project that actually Peter will talk about a little bit later was making sure that we were getting lots of involvement from partners. And so we had a teacher advisory board of teachers that had piloted this course who help advise and review our lesson plans. We also worked with a lot of community experts to kind of tell the history that they are the experts on so that we could share that with students. And so what these materials ended up looking like is something we call a digital resource pack. So we basically selected 10 topics that align with the curriculum, so align with what these high school students will be learning about, but with a Connecticut perspective. So for example, like the civil rights movement in Connecticut or Puerto Rican activism in Connecticut. So each digital resource pack has a lesson plan and all of the materials a teacher would need. So what we are going to be kind of talking to you about today is specifically the kind of activities and the research that we did for the Antebellum Black community in Connecticut lesson and kind of focus a little bit on that one. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Peter.
Thanks, Corinne. Yeah, and I hope everybody or a few of you spotted that the path of safety made it into our title for this lesson plan that we're going to be looking at today on antebellum communities. So congratulations to everyone who caught that. You've got the makings of a museum educator in you. But yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the work process that actually went into this. I'm a museum educator at the Connecticut Museum, and one of the things that was really exciting about this project was the fact that, high school history class wasn't the most exciting, engaging thing. So getting the chance to work with folks like Corinne and write these lessons was a huge opportunity. And it also meant we had a great chance to really dive into the collection that we have at the Connecticut Museum that's been accumulating for, almost 200 years now, to see what it reflects. And that experience came with, well, you see right there, it came with some challenges. It came with some rewards. And a lot of that just reflects the reality of our collective past, of Connecticut's history. So the broad strokes of that, when we talk about antebellum Connecticut, we're talking about before the Civil War. That's what antebellum means, before the war. In 1784, Connecticut had passed a gradual emancipation law, starting to end the practice of slavery, but state abolition didn't take place fully until 1848, about 12 years before the events leading to the Civil War. And so when we're looking through our historical record of that period, one of the things that immediately becomes clear is something that would be true of any given historical period, and that's the correlation between power and visibility. one thing I'm curious about is if anyone here has encountered a one of those signs that say George Washington slept here. Let me know. Give me a thumbs up or let me know where you saw it in the chat. But those George Washington slept here, those things are everywhere. The guy was sleeping all the time, apparently, because you can't move through New England or most of the East Coast without running into a George Washington slept here. Um, that's a person with a lot of power, did a lot of things in their life. There's a lot of visibility about details like where did they sleep that night. We can look through letters, we can look through journals, we can see a lot of portraits, outfits. We can learn a lot about a person's life. When we think about people with less power, whether that's the power that is related to, um, your wealth, whether that's related to your political authority, whether that's related to things like gender, race, um, you start seeing that folks with less power have correspondingly less visibility in a historical record. So a great source that I really enjoy looking through is the Barber vital records, vital statistics. This is pretty dry stuff, but every town in Connecticut has its vital statistics: births, marriages, deaths, um, and you can look through those in the colonial era into the 1850s. Is this Barber historic collection, and you can look up when someone was born, when someone was married, when they died. They've got all the names listed alphabetically by each town. In the back section of each town, though, they have a separate section for the names of African American people and the names of Irish people. Folks in those categories don't have a surname. Sometimes they don't even have a first name. It might say something just like Sally died and a date in a certain year. And that's what I'm talking about when I say that visibility can decrease when power is also decreased. It actually takes a lot of privilege to make a lasting mark in the historic record. So that was the challenge. Some of the challenges that we encountered when we started looking through our collection. Certain people are very well represented, certain people are not well represented. And that's something that you can see in a lot of different historic collections, a lot of different historic records. Um, the good news is that there are absolutely some gems, and these are the objects that we use to guide students towards the larger story of antebellum Black community. So you saw one of them already, this sampler made by Miranda Robinson when she's just 8 years old, which is really an amazing artifact. And like you all were saying in the comments, really tells us a lot about Miranda's childhood, about things that could have been important to her. Um, One of the details I really love is that the path of safety, she runs out of room on that line, um, which is just, if you've ever seen an 8-year-old try to make a sign or write a card, it's very, very understandable. So it's a really relatable artifact, and it really tells us a lot about Miranda as a person. And that's a great tool because we don't have a ton of other artifacts or a ton of other information to share about Miranda Robinson. What we have are vital statistics. We know she was born in Old Saybrook. We know the year, born in 1831. You saw on that sampler, it says she made it when she was 8 years old. We have some other artifacts of hers that were donated to the museum. Uh, and so we have a family Bible that's got some other important dates listed in there. Um, we know through the U.S. Census that in 1860 she was working at the Colt Mansion, Armsmere, in Hartford, and her employment is listed as a domestic servant. She's not there in the 1870 census, which makes us think that she'd moved on to another opportunity. But we do know that she married a man named Joseph P. Anderson, October 1871, and we know that she is buried at the Junction Cemetery in Old Saybrook. You can go look at it if you were curious. Miranda Anderson um, is listed right there. Um, so we know these broad strokes, right? And within it, we have these animating artifacts. Uh, but we don't have things like a portrait. This is a photograph of a woman whose name we don't know, but it's from uh, this woman's photo was taken in Norwich, Connecticut, so we know similar region, we know similar era. This was taken in about probably 1870. Um, so this is something where we can say this is a contemporary of Miranda Robinson. Um, but we don't have, a journal of hers. We don't have correspondence by her. And instead we have to look to other tools to really contextualize her life, um, and get a more rounded idea of who this person was. So another great set of artifacts in the collection were these images. And just like we did with the sampler, I'm hoping I can ask you to drop into the chat what you see going on in these two images. You'll see that one of them is hand drawn, one of them is a photograph, and they're the same man. Professor Jim is how he's titled in there. But go ahead, take a minute here and just tell me what you notice. Yeah, someone is spotted right away. We have some cleaning tools on the left portrait there. There's a broom behind him and a bucket as well. Yeah, nicely dressed. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, it's a great. I don't know what everybody wears to work, but this is not the degree of I mean, the coat alone is just a great piece of work here. Does look proud. I'm glad. Yeah, Barb, absolutely. There's really a sense that, a lot of dignity and a lot of this portrait on the right almost looks like, could be a presidential portrait, say, something like that. So I'll tell you, somebody noticed, was this a professor uh, here in Connecticut? And what you'd see actually below that title of Professor Jim was that he was the janitor at Trinity College. It's a little bit faint on this image, but yeah, exactly, Allison got it. Yeah, he was the janitor at Trinity College for many years in Hartford. And similar to Miranda, we know some broad strokes about his life. Um, James Williams was born into slavery in New York in 1788. He passed away in 1878. He self-emancipated. He escaped from his enslavers in New York and worked as a sailor for years before becoming a janitor at Trinity College at its founding in Hartford, where he worked for many years, right up till the end of his life. He married a woman named Maria A. This is a great example of not knowing all the details that we would like to know. We don't have a surname or much more detail besides the fact that she was an enslaved woman from Barbados, who he met in Hartford. He was a member of the Prince Hall Masons Lodge, which is a Black fraternal organization, um, and a co-founder of the AME Zion Church in Hartford, the second oldest Black church um, in that city. And we know about a son of his, Hosea, named after the Reverend there. And he shows up in the 1870 census, living in a house on Rifle Avenue with an adopted daughter and his wife in a household worth $11,000 today. So again, we have some broad strokes, maybe a little more detail here because James William, in his position at Trinity, um, had a lot of um, had his stories recorded by students and alumni of Trinity who published, he became something like a mascot for that school, a real emblem of the school for students there. And many different generations would pass through and would get to know um, this man who they named Professor Jim. Um, and so because his story was recorded, we know a little bit more detail. We can't, know for certain how many of these stories are maybe a little bit dressed up, but we've got a little bit of detail. We've got those portraits. Um, and again, we're left with some real questions about what what James Williams' life would have been like on a day-to-day basis. Um, so we look at these artifacts, we wonder what they can tell us. We wonder who the people are that are behind these names and behind these dates and behind these artifacts. that we do have in our collection. Um, and from there, we start filling it in with context. So I'm going to throw a pop quiz to you all in attendance here. Just drop in the chat historical events that you can think of off the top of your head that happened in the lifetime of James Williams or Miranda Robinson. So we're looking at 1788 at the start to 1903 is when Miranda Robinson passes away. Um, what's stuff that they would have seen happening? And I'll tell you one that's going to be a deep cut here. James Williams in that memoir. Oh, somebody already's got it. The duel, the Aaron Burr duel, that took place in the early 1800s, where Alexander Hamilton was killed. Aaron Burr actually first fled to the house of James Williams enslaver when he was on the run out of New York City after killing Alexander Hamilton. But yeah, I see a lot of great, you guys know your history. So, yes, disenfranchised, exactly. We've got the Hartford race riot, War of 1812. Yep, the Civil War. Exactly right. Um, yeah, major events. And it's safe to assume then that these are things that people would have had opinions on, people would have had perspective on, maybe something that you would have thought about, maybe something you would have talked to people about. Um, these are the sort of things that can fill in, yep, the passage of the 13th through 15th Amendment are huge. Um, and so we don't know, we don't have Miranda's diary or a letter where she's telling someone what she thinks about the Civil War. But we can assume that this is something um, that would have been on their mind, right? So how do we keep building out that context? Um, we know historic, we know big pictures, but we can focus a little bit more because we know that in 1860, both of these people were living in the city of Hartford. So this is a map of that city in 1859. And as you can probably guess, a city leaves a much bigger mark in the historical record than any one individual. So we can look at Hartford in 1860 and we know what's in the news that year. We can look at directories from that year. We know that there's this new park that's been opened right in the middle of downtown. Um, we can look at that and we can see the streets that these people may have walked down. We can look at the businesses, the churches, the homes that they would have lived in. Remember that we know the places of work for both of these people. We know that Miranda Robinson in 1860 was working at Armsmere, this mansion that's still standing today in Hartford. Um, and we know that James Williams worked at Trinity College and lived in a house just down the road. We can look at both of those and we can start saying, here's where they were going every day. Here's where they would have, shown up every morning. We also know about institutions like the Talcott Street Church. This is Hartford's oldest Black church. Um, and again, an institution leaves a much bigger mark on the historical record than any one individual. So we know that the Talcott Street Church was founded in 1819 because Black residents of Hartford were getting sick of, being forced to sit in the worst seats at these white churches. We know that there were folks working there like Reverend James Pennington, someone who escaped from slavery and was a prolific figure for emancipation and preacher in the New England area. We know that Talcott Street Church had one of the only schools available for Black students in Hartford for many years. And we know that this institution served as a center for Black culture and community, even as it took on different names and moved to different structures throughout the city. And I really would encourage, if anyone's curious about learning more about this community, about Hartford at this time, there's been some really excellent research work done, a lot of it using the research library at the Connecticut Museum of Culture and History. Um, just talking about the history of this really amazing institution and the role that it played. So what we've done now is we've used uh, bigger marks in the historic record to kind of contextualize and flesh out the world that these two individuals occupied. So at this point, this is where we would ask high schoolers to start thinking a little bit about what all of this means. If they start putting all of this together, they can start thinking about these sort of questions that are trying to humanize these people who we don't have a lot of direct uh, primary records for. Um, Start getting at, things that may have colored their life, that may have really uh, affected their decisions and their lives in and outside of work, um, and the things that maybe um, help bring them joy or sorrow in the course of their lifetime. Um, Now, to try and sum this up in a little more concise way than what than me talking for a solid 30 minutes, we actually went ahead and created something that students could interact with in the classroom themselves as part of this lesson. And that's a story map, which I'm not sure if you all are familiar with this tool, but it's a really helpful digital media tool that just allows you to very easily create a narrative website um, that people can scroll through and connect media, whether that's text, whether that's imagery, with geotagged locations. So which are actual places, intersections, structures in the city of Hartford. So we're just going to scroll through this quickly because I don't want to take up your whole afternoon. But what we created on here is a piece of historical fiction, an imagining of one day where Miranda Robinson and James William wake up in their respective homes and go about their days. Now, we kept this as verifiable as possible. We didn't want to get into, specific conversations or start making up dialogue or anything like that. But we wanted to just convey to high school students that the same way they wake up, they go to school, maybe they go to church, they go meet up with friends, maybe, or they go walk through the park. These are all things that these people could have done at that time. The point here is that we want folks to start thinking and flexing those muscles of historic consciousness, historical imagination, really recognizing that Miranda Robertson and James Williams are people who are, lived just like them, just like us. This isn't, history in a textbook where it's, dry cut dates that you're memorizing so that you can pass the test. Um, we want to help students develop um, that historic empathy where they can recognize another human being, even though it's across centuries of um, time. So what this assignment leads to, um, once students have, looked at these artifacts, once they've looked through that story map, is it actually encourages them um, to do some creative writing of their own, to start authoring their own historic fiction. We even found some music that Karina will play here that was being played in the year 1860. We won't subject you to the whole thing, but Abraham Lincoln had an incredibly catchy campaign song that you know will be stuck in your head for weeks afterwards if you listen to it. So thank you for cutting that one short, Corinne. But what we asked these high schoolers to do is imagine this interaction. We know these two people lived in the same city in the same year. We know what was happening that year. What do you think they would have talked about? What do you think they would have been worried about? What do you think they would have been wearing? It's really just this encouragement to recognize that the people in the past, the people in our history, um, are not completely out of reach. Um, there's similarities there. There's differences too, of course. Um, but we want to start making sure that the foundation of that historic consciousness gets laid by people recognizing the humanity of people who came before them, even if we don't have a photograph of what they look like or we don't have a letter written in their own hand. We want people to recognize that they're just as human as George Washington, even though their lives might not be as well documented. Um, Now, the big part of this is that we also did not want to confine it to Hartford. We didn't want to confine it to these two people because these are lessons that are meant to be taught across Connecticut. And so we identified three other partnership opportunities. And you see them here on the map, the folks that we worked with, Regan Miner and Janine Guillet. at the Norwich Historical Society, Jesse Nasta and Marty Lohman at the Middlesex County Historical Society and Wesleyan University, and then Maisa Tisdale at the Mary and Eliza Freeman houses, which are down in Bridgeport. Um, these are all folks who live in these communities, in these respective communities, Middletown, Norwich, and Bridgeport, and have done the work. Um, they have studied and researched their local histories. And even better than that, they have created accessible, public facing, and engaging presentations of these histories. So all three of these sites have terrific um, websites that they've created um, that we connect these high schoolers with, where we encourage them to go do the research or go read the stories that these folks have collected. So those three different websites are all up on the screen here. And I would strongly encourage anyone here who's interested in what we're talking about today to go learn a little bit more about, the Freeman Center or the Beaman Triangle in Middletown or Jail Hill in Norwich. These are three historic Black neighborhoods in Antebellum, Connecticut, um, that didn't have someone like James Williams or Miranda Robinson um, to, uh, help us illustrate their community. But there are three communities that have really interesting, unique stories of their own, and also similarities um, with other antebellum Black communities in Connecticut. So in this lesson with these high schoolers, what we're asking them to do is conduct their research using any of these three websites or another, reputable website that they identify about another Black community in Connecticut, but to look through them, answer some questions, do some research, and then talk to each other, really talk about what's unique and what commonalities they see in the experiences of these three communities across the state of Connecticut. And I'm going to just quickly touch on a few of those commonalities that we're hoping they will pick up on, and that all three of these local historical researchers have touched upon. One of the biggest being real estate. Um, Land ownership is a huge asset in Antebellum, Connecticut, and it was difficult as a person of color to buy a piece of land from anywhere you wanted. You really needed a willing seller in addition to being a willing buyer. And that's one of the reasons that these communities arose where they did. There were specific sites, Jail Hill, the Beaman Triangle, and Little Liberia in Bridgeport, where there were motivated sellers who were willing to sell to people of color. And that was something that people were willing to take advantage of. You had communities form there because you could buy your own plot of land and you could build your own house. You could settle down there and start a family. And, then as now, home ownership is the pathway to intergenerational wealth. That's a tremendous achievement to make in your life and to pass on to your children. But all of those necessary steps, whether it's mortgages or borrowing money or the the a willing real estate seller in the first place, those could all be obstacles in certain areas. Um, and so one of the things we hope people notice is this pattern of affordable real estate being identified in less desirable neighborhoods in larger cities. So Jail Hill was less desirable because, as the name implies, there was a jail right on the top of the hill there. The Beaman Triangle was a small, swampy piece of real estate. And then similarly, Little Liberia was an exposed, low-lying area along the coast of Bridgeport that was prone to flooding. Um, but all three of these became sites of really robust communities because there was an opportunity there to develop it. And in all three cases, one of the next commonalities that we see is the role of the Black church. Um, we talked about it briefly in Hartford, but in all three of these communities across Connecticut, a black church was founded, um, either in or very nearby that piece of real estate that we're talking about, where people were able to build their homes. Um, and the role of the black church in these communities really can't be overstated. As you probably know, the AME Zion um, is one of the foremost, institutions, black churches in the United States. Um, you see it all across the country, and these churches served as networks for people in the community. This could be a site for mutual aid, could be a site for basic social services. It could also be a site for networking in a business sense, for finding jobs, for finding employment, for building this interconnected economy um, within a community. They're also, on a really basic level, schools. We talked about the Talcott Street Church in Hartford being one of the only schools for Black children in that city. This was true in these other cities as well. This was an opportunity in the church to have a community organized school um, where your children could be, gain a real education as they're growing up there. And then one of the points that we really wanted to make clear is that, obviously things like mutual aid, things like political organizing, worship at a church are vital on a much more basic level. A church and a neighborhood, this is a site for joy. Um, this is a site for a community to really form those bonds of friendship. Sorry about that. Marriages came out of these communities. Children are born in these communities. These are places where people live their lives, and it's not entirely defined by um, the laws of the age or oppressions suffered by folks in these communities. Um, these churches and these communities are really sites where um, you could author a little bit of your own destiny. Um, as well as advocate for a better future. Anyone else who's really interested in learning more, I'd suggest looking into the colored conventions of the era at a state and national level. These churches were really conducive to the organizing that happened at those gatherings as well. Um, but one of the last theme that I wanted to really touch on here was waves of change. Um, these three communities are very different now from what they looked like in the antebellum years. Um, in Bridgeport, the Little Liberia neighborhood, it's called the Mary and Eliza Freeman uh, Center because the house owned by the two houses owned by those sisters, are the only structures remaining from this antebellum period, from that original neighborhood that arose there. Um, the real estate that was available for Black communities to rise up in, to organize and settle into, was also vulnerable to change over time. So in Bridgeport, there's a lot of um, industrial zoning that took place. Um, there was, you know, well, there was change that took place both from top-down decisions. Um, there was also change that took place just through changing waves of immigration, through changing needs and desires of families to stay in one place or to move on to another one. Um, one of the things that you see as we move past antebellum Connecticut's history into post-war and early 20th century is waves of Irish immigration, Italian immigration, um, and I'm sure if you one may come to mind, and I welcome you to put it in the chat now. But you might have a neighborhood in the town you live or in the city that you live in that's really defined as this is the Polish neighborhood, this is the Irish neighborhood here. Jail Hill became a predominantly Irish neighborhood for many years in the 20th century. The Beeman Triangle as well, before those structures and that real estate was acquired by Wesleyan University, changed hands and was no longer known as predominantly Black neighborhood. So the waves of change that occurs and keeps occurring um, is a final theme that we hope students recognize as they're looking through these local histories. Um, the stories, change may seem incredibly slow in our lifetimes, but when you take that long view and you look at the history on fast forward, you realize that one wave after another passes through the towns and the cities that we live in, and it always leaves a mark. It always changes things in ways we expect, and some ways that we don't expect. Um, so to really try and communicate some of this history to students without making them read every page uh, of uh, of research that had been published by these different historians, we actually went ahead and created a educational video that I'll hand back over to Karine to introduce.
Perfect. Thanks, Peter. So this video, like Peter said, we produced as part of this lesson. Something else I think I should mention too is that most of the slides and the content that we've been talking about is part of the lesson. So everything we just went through with looking at the objects and everything is what high schoolers would be doing in this lesson. So in this video, you'll get to hear from the community experts that Peter mentioned earlier. I will also say that I know that there's going to be a slight lag in the video. It's just because of the way that we're streaming it. But I can drop the link to the YouTube video in the chat for anyone who wants to watch it on their own later. So just give me a moment and I will mute myself and play their video.
My name is Janine Gillette, and I'm a resident of Norwich, and I'm here to talk about Jail Hill. So Jail Hill is a neighborhood in Norwich that held one of the most significant African American communities between the years of 1830 and 1860 approximately. In the 1830s, they built the county jail up on the hill. The courthouse was in that area, so it made logistical sense. The jail being built there depressed the land values and made it affordable for marginalized communities. That made it so that African Americans, who were the most marginalized community at the time, were able to afford to buy houses there, which wasn't common. So at the bottom of the hill, you have the Second Congregational Church. And this church was really prominent in the abolitionist movement, and they worked hard to provide educational opportunities for people of color in the area. So in 1815, Charles Harrington, who's a member of the church, begins the Sabbath School for African Americans. And by 1817, you have 41 adults and children enrolled in the school. This helps to open things up. So you have African American families who begin to join the church. And many of those families end up moving into Jail Hill. I think the Second Congregational Church played such a huge role because having the opportunity for education, what you see is a lot of these people are able to get educated and then their kids are educated. That's this line that you see throughout, which enables them to have greater opportunities, enables them some mobility. They have these houses, then they can sell them and have the ability to purchase elsewhere. So Charles Harris was one of the first people to buy a house in Jail Hill. He was a subscription agent and a distributor for The Liberator, which was a radical abolitionist newspaper founded by William Lloyd Garrison. And so his job was to help get that newspaper out to people who might be interested in the area. Through that job, he came into contact with Prudence Crandall. He was also engaged to one of her servants. His sister, Sarah Harris, became the first African-American girl to attend her boarding school for girls. For the African-American community at that time, it mattered so much to have those connections because that was what gave them a chance to be able to get work. There were businesses that they would frequent and help each other out. It meant everything. It was their chance to have a life and give their kids a life.
I'm Marty Lohman. I am the historian for the historical Cross Street African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. The Beeman Triangle is a area of land that's shaped like a triangle. And in 1849, a gentleman named Leonard Beeman purchased this property. It was kind of in bad shape. It's called a dead swamp, but he purchased it anyway. And he divided the property into 11 lots. He sold the lots to freed Africans, and they built their homes on this property. It would be impossible to tell the story of this triangle without telling the story of the church, because basically the church, helped develop the community. The community developed the church. The people had many things in common. One of the things they had in common is they were very poor, and they helped each other. They made their living as workers, as laborers, farmers, maids. They needed each other, and they relied upon each other. Other professions that these people had, they were seamstresses, they were seamen, and often they had to take boarders in to help them pay their rent. So it was a community of people sort of in the same boat. They experienced a lot of hardship. And people would ask, well, if they were free, why was it that they were always struggling for freedom? And this was one of the difficulties. And it was the fact that these people were Black, and that as a result of their race, prejudice, injustice, mistreatment happened for them. And so they fought against these things. And they thrived as a result, of their fight. This story about the Beamans is a story that it expresses hardships. It expresses difficult times, and it's not always easy to sustain yourself and to live. And the things that helped this community were working together and sharing, lifting each other up at the times, when it's needed. The people who lived here were very interested in education. And certainly it was education that allowed them to improve their lives. But things were difficult. They were very difficult for the people here. Education is basically what has carried us through these 200 years, that we've made the right choices, that we were able to live under various conditions, whether we wanted to live in this way or not. But we did as a result of educating ourselves.
It's really important to understand that this community was founded. This community had as its mission giving full citizenship to people of color, especially Black people. My name is Maisa Tisdale, and I'm the president of the Mary and Eliza Freeman Center for History and Community. Little Liberia is one of the nation's oldest settlements, early settlements of free people of color. It was founded in 1821. Imagine, in 1821, the nation was only 45 years old, and you have people whose families actually participated in the American Revolution, who now were no longer considered citizens of the newly chartered state. They came from a number of places and from many different backgrounds, and they challenge our perceptions of race and culture, the ones that we hold on to today. So by deliberately starting a settlement that was completely composed of people of color, and making sure that that settlement also offered sanctuary and opportunity for people who were escaping slavery, they actually created a place that they could actually control. And if you're engaged in activities that have to do with the Underground Railroad, or if you want to be in a place where you won't be harassed or subject to violence, having this bit of isolation was very important. Mary and Eliza Freeman, the women of African and Indigenous descent, as we believe them to be, they owned and operated businesses at a time when that was unachievable by many men, let alone women of their same background and status. So women in Little Liberia played a role in society that many others didn't have at that time, and that was a social innovation. The men, many of worked at sea, were away, and so women ran and founded many businesses. But there were segregation laws that said that where white people lived and worked and went to school, Black people could not live and work and go to school. You see Black people and other people of color be pushed out. So then you see this area go through the history of redlining, and you see that it becomes an acceptable and designated place for toxic industries, for utilities, for housing projects, for sewer plants and the like. And it becomes a less desirable place to live. Only about 2 to 3% of all of the places, tens of thousands of listings on the National Register of Historic Places, have anything to do with Black history. Of all of the places listed, only 0.2% tell the story, the history of the time of the Freeman houses, the antebellum free communities that existed. 0.2%. These stories are American stories, and they put the context of the history that we learned with so many chapters left out into perspective.
All right. So thank you all. I am going to, I think, switch slides. Give me a second. There we go. So I'm actually going to pass it over to Natalie, who's just going to talk a little bit about some upcoming other programs that we have, but then we will open it up for questions in the chat if anybody wanted to ask us or share anything about anything that we've talked about today. So take it away, Natalie.
Thanks, Green. I'm not going to take much of your time, just to let folks know that there are, we have 3 of our upcoming programs up there. You can register for these programs by going to connecticutmuseum.org. I know that the Lunch and Learn crowd tends to be pretty loyal, so our next one coming up is actually about John Quincy Adams' role in the Amistad Affair, so that you can register for that one. That's coming up on March 12th. And I think that's all. Marina, I'll open it up back to you, and I think you're going to do Q&A at this point.
Yeah. So if anybody has any questions that they want to drop in the chat, I see some folks have also been dropping some really great resources and places to look for more research or learning about these topics. That is also super, super helpful. So thanks for doing that. Any other questions? Oh, yes. And I saw that there was this question earlier. And yes, I will drop the link for the video. Thank you for reminding me, Jody. Great question about resources for younger children. I will say that we specifically developed these lessons to be for that. So this course is an elective course that is technically for, I believe, like 10th through 12th grade. So that's what we wrote these at the age level for. But I would point you, I think, maybe to look at Teach It is a really great resource run by Connecticut Humanities. It's all lesson plans and teacher resources specifically about Connecticut history. So I bet especially things about like the Talcott Street Church or other of these local stories, I bet you that there's definitely things on Teach It. Thanks, Peter. And actually, Peter, while I grab the YouTube link, do you want to talk about, I think there was a question about the story maps. Go ahead.
Yeah, story maps are a great free resource to use. So I would strongly encourage, if you've got a story or research that you're looking to share, or a narrative you want to share with folks, um, ArcGIS story maps are something you have to create your own login account for it. But these guys do a, let's see, arcgis.com. It's a very intuitive, user-friendly tool, and I think it really helps people um, engage with a written text or engage with a narrative that you're sharing um, with the by using geolocating tools. And there's a ton of examples that this company likes to share, where national parks, other history museums, other universities have are sharing their research using that tool. Again, it's free to use. It's one of those things where there's a free level and then there's a premium level that's a bit more expensive than free. But you get, we were able to create what we created entirely on the free level, and there's a lot of amazing work that people do. So if there is something that you're interested in sharing, or if you want to check out some really amazing examples of other people's story maps, I would encourage looking into that.
I think we have time for one more question. We know that we said this was going to end at 1. And if there aren't any more questions, that's okay too.
Thank you, Barb. Also, I appreciate you sharing. It was a great project to work on, and now it really is the part where we just want to make sure it gets a lot of use. So we've had really positive feedback from teachers in Connecticut who are using it in their classrooms. But feel free to share these with anyone teaching any history classes that you think might find it interesting or relevant.
All right. Well, we want to thank you all so much for being with us today and listening to this project. And, I'm just going to drop Peter and I's emails in the chat. And feel free to email us if you have any follow-up questions or if you wanted to learn more about these resources. We'd always be happy to chat. And we hope that you all enjoy the rest of your afternoons. And thank you so much for being with us today. All right.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the day.
Bye.